Hello, everyone. Good afternoon if you're in the West Coast. Good evening if you're East Coast of the US. And if you're watching from China, good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Rozelle. I'm the Helen Farnsworth Senior Fellow and co-director of Stanford Center on China's Economy and Institutions. For nearly 40 years, personally, I've been working on the economics of poverty reduction. And of course, since there's no more poverty in China now, it's fantastic accomplishment. I'm focused on trying to keep poverty from returning by looking at issues of human capital in the rural economy, issues of health and nutrition, education, and mostly early childhood development. So what is SCI? So SCCEI, lots of we pronounce it SCI for short. We're Stanford's home for empirical, multidisciplinary research on China's economy. We really are trying to focus on the most important relationship in the world today, U.S.-Chinese relations, and educate people on issues of there. At SCI, we really do three things. We're trying to foster path-breaking research. We really are focused on students and trying to give them a transformative experience. As soon as we're allowed to come back to China, we hopefully soon, we do lots of in-the-field research and in-the-field student experiences. And probably what makes us really special here is we're trying to advance public understanding of China's economy and its impact on the world. As you probably know, this very complex relationship, we don't know a lot of things about a lot of important dimensions of it. And that's what we're going to try to sort of harness Stanford's power of research and collaborations with our affiliates in China and around the world to do that much, much better, to try to facilitate a more productive relationship, one that will let people in both countries and around the world flourish. Okay. So the goal of this is China Chats. We're hosting a series of faculty talks bringing you the latest of China research. When this pandemic gets over, we'll be hopefully together in a big auditorium in Beijing or Shanghai or Shenzhen or elsewhere in China, but we're on Zoom now. And we want to give you the insights from Stanford to our alums and our friends around the world. We're really pleased to partner with the Stanford Alumni Association to offer China Chats event series and hope to connect with more Stanford alums and friends who are interested in understanding more about China-related research. I mean, it's in all of our interest to get this right. Today's discussion is being recorded, and the recording is going to be available next week. So if you have to leave early or if you have a friend that wants to listen to it, it's going to be a really interesting talk. And also please type your questions into the Q&A box. I'm going to be moderating it once Hongbin's done. It's going to take about 30 minutes here, and I'll pull from there, and Hongbin will, I'm sure, answer them. And so with that, let me introduce today's speaker, Hongbin Li. Professor Hongbin Li is also the co-director of SCI, so we're co-directors together. He graduated with a PhD in economics from Stanford in 2001 and was a professor at Chinese University of Hong Kong and Tsinghua University before returning to Stanford as a senior fellow at the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy 2 years ago. I should say, one of my great accomplishments as an academic is I found Hongbin. He was an undergraduate in going to college in Beijing, and we were doing work in our very first project in poor areas of southern Shanxi and northern Shanxi, and he was one of the 40 students that was doing a survey for us, and he was by far the most outstanding one. 2 years later, he's at Stanford. So Hongbin, the floor is yours. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'll be back to ask a lot of hard questions.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I was the lucky one to be found by Scott, and so I have been with Stanford for a long time, first as a student and later coming back as a faculty member. Hello, everyone. So it's really a pleasure today to share with you my work on China's manufacturing, especially the robot today. So as many of you, I think have noticed that China's manufacturing is the most important driver for China's growth since the reform started about 40 years ago. It's also, I think, the focal point for debates, both among policymakers or in the media, whether it's an issue about trade, technology, or issues about labor and environment. Although manufacturing of China is so important, there have been so few studies, especially good empirical studies. So what do I mean as an economist to say good empirical study? I don't have a very good answer. Actually, I'm going to use some cartoon drawn by an economist. I think he's a friend of mine and a former colleague, Wen Sun. So he draw a couple of cartoons to illustrate how different fields form a theory using data. So in the graph here on the top, so the 2 points is the data. So the line is theory. So for mathematicians, it's very simple. If there are 2 points, if we connect the 2 points and make a line. Physicists, actually, their job is harder, but they can still put all the points on one line by doing controlled experiments. So they can control many factors and then put all the dots on the line. I think the fun part is for social sciences. So this is from Vincent, not from me, actually. So here are a few different fields. For journalism, they can draw a line using 1 point. And then for philosopher, it's even easier. They can make a theory without any data, so no point at all. So for economists, we have a lot of data, a lot of points. We will try to fit one line that can best explain this data. This is what we do. So for all 3 fields, journalism, philosophy, and economics, there's a positive slope line. But for politics, for the same data, the line could be negative slope. I know this is a joke. This is like lighthearted. I think in a healthy society, we need all fields, all social science fields to have a good society. But this cartoon illustrates how economists work with data. So we lack large-scale quantitative data. This is what we use for our studies. But for Sky researchers, for Scott and me and other friends and faculty members here at Stanford, we also go to the field, talk to CEOs, workers, farmers, students, and then we collect our own data for our studies. So this is one thing we are different from many other economists even. So back to my study. There are a few interesting hypotheses about China's manufacturing, export, and technology. Let me go through this. So the first one is called trade dependence hypothesis. Basically says that China's manufacturing depends mainly on trade. Is this true? So this is the so-called one measure of trade dependency. Basically, it's the proportion of GDP that is exported, export as a proportion of GDP. As you can see that China started very low and then started trend up since reform started in the late 70s. It really skyrocketed since China joined the WTO in early 2000 and then reached the peak of 36% in 2006. And then started to decline during the financial crisis. After that, the speed of decline is slowing down, but still declining. So by 2019, the year before the pandemic, so the export as a ratio GDP has come down to 18%, which is the same number as it was before China joined WTO. So this is China's own trends. If we put this into perspective, compare China to other countries. So these are the 30 largest economies in the world. this is a trade dependency ratio. Basically, this is trade is export plus import divided by GDP. That's why these numbers are bigger than 18%. So China is here. So export as proportion GDP is 34%, which is pretty high, but it's not the highest among all the major economies. US is really low, it's about 20%, but this doesn't count services. This is only trading of goods, manufacturing goods. But China is not very high compared to these other countries. If we look at the same indicator for different industries, these are all the industries. I selected 8 industries. You can see that for all these industries, whether it's leather, wearing apparel, textile, instrument, or transport equipment, for every industry, almost every industry except textiles, the sales value of all these sectors have increased in the past decade. But if you look at export as a ratio of sales value or production value, for every single sector, it has declined in the past decade. So what does this mean? It basically means that trade is still very important for China's manufacturing for sure, but it might be less important than many other major economies. And China's trade dependency has been declining over time and very fast, declining at a very fast speed. So the main implication for my today's study is that China's manufacturing, especially the incremental part, is mainly for meeting domestic demand. This just happens naturally when our economy grows, when people's income increases, their consumption, their own consumption will increase. So this has nothing to do with a trade war. Actually, this has declined for a decade. Of course, not the focus today, but this is also important that trade wars will hurt China, but it might hurt other trading economies even more because they depend on trade even more than China do. The second important hypothesis, so-called HighTech Hypothesis. So this basically says that Chinese exporters are the higher tech part of China's manufacturing sector. Is this true? Let me first admit that economists know little about real technology. So if you ask me real hard question on engineering science, I have to say I know nothing actually, because we are not trained doing this. Even if we know technology, it's really hard for economists to study them because they are not comparable across firms or industries. So what do we do when we study technology, even study robot? So we use values of either input or output to measure technology. So the input measure basically is the capital, we call capital intensity or capital labor ratio. Basically, it's a dollar value of the machinery per worker being used in a firm. The output value basically is that the labor, so-called labor productivity, is the output value per worker at a given time, either per day, per month, or per year. So economists use this to measure technology difference across firms. So, I mean, there have been many studies on whether exporting firms compared to non-exporting firms, which one are more productive, or which one have higher technologies. So this is an example of Mexico, actually. Let me show this. So if you compare non-exporters to exporters, you can see that for all these indicators, whether it's the size of a firm, this is a capital labor ratio, how capital intensive a firm is. This is the daily wages. So this is basically measures the skill level of workers being hired. Exporters in Mexico, for every indicator, were higher than non-exporters. By the way, this is a number in 1993. So this is almost 30 years ago. If you look at the wage of Mexican workers, they were paid like, this is like $6 a day. So by I think 2002, Mexican workers were already paid about $1,000 a month. So, but if we look at China, so this is Mexico. For many other countries, almost if you study any country except China, you find that exporters are more technologically advanced than non-exporters. But if you go to China, so I just draw a simple line of the 8 industries I've been studying. You can see that there's a downward sloping line. So the x-axis is the capital labor ratio. The y-axis is the export ratio as a percent of sales. You can see that when we go to the right, basically more capital intensive industries, basically more better technology industries, there's less export. So this is using capital intensity. Basically trade or export is negatively correlated with technology in China. If we use another measure of technology, labor productivity, in 2019, we still find the same negative sloping trend. If we go back to 10 years ago, go 2010 data, still the same negative trend. We use 2001 data, still similar. So almost universally in China, the exporting part of the manufacturing sector is the lower technology part. This is different from all other countries, all other developing countries, or developed countries, actually. So this is more data, actually. This is drawn by using my own firm survey I've introduced maybe a few minutes later. So there are like 200 firms here. If we do a regression line, we find a similar downward sloping trend. Of course, there are more data, the line fits better. So let me give you a real example. This is a firm I visited right before the pandemic. So this guy is the founder and boss of this firm, owner of the firm. He was 29 years old. He already owned 8 different firms. So he's showing this product. This is a baby stroller being exported to other countries. This is his nice showroom. And this is the products he used and imported from other countries, actually. This is the export, this is the import. So what kind of technology does he use? Let me show you his workshop. So this is the production line of this firm, actually. Don't be surprised if you have buy a baby stroller. This is produced here, actually. This is the production line to making the frame of the baby stroller. And this is the part making the fabric of the stroller. One of the key technologies of this firm is this worker. He's operating a very important machine for this firm. Let me show you the video clip. So what he's doing, he's actually punching holes of this frame so that this can be put onto the stroller. He's, I think, doing this like, I think maybe 1,000 to 2,000 times a day. By the way, he has college degree. His boss has only high school degree. So back to the hypothesis. So do we find evidence to support HighTech hypothesis? Actually, no. Actually, this is not raised by myself. Actually, there was actually very interesting hypothesis raised by a young economist 10 years ago. So what's the takeaway from this part? Exporters in China are not the high-tech part. It's a low-tech sector of the China's manufacturing firms. They use less machineries and they are less productive. So the implication is that exporters in China are labor intensive. Of course, that means they are also wage sensitive. Although not the focus of today, this also shows that the technologies used by most Chinese exporters would not have been used by any developed country because the productivity cannot justify the wages being paid. So this leads to my next hypothesis, the cheap labor hypothesis. This basically says that the reason for manufacturing to come to China and to stay in China is China has cheap labor. So what happened to China's wage in the past two decades? This is the figure. The red line is China. You can see that started very low and then increases really fast. So by the year before pandemic, China's monthly wage had already reached to about $1,000 a month. And it's higher than all the other countries on this. So you can see that this is, I think this is, this is Brazil, this is Mexico, and India and Indonesia are here actually. So you can see that if you compare China's wage, India and Indonesia wage is only about maybe 15 to 20%, much lower actually. So by all means, China is not a low wage country anymore. I think it's a middle level wage among all countries in the world. But cheap labor is a very misleading concept. Even in my paper I published about 20 years ago, this paper, The End of Chinese Labor, the end of cheap Chinese labor. So we spent a lot of time trying to persuade readers that when you look at so-called cheap labor, you should also look at productivity. Here's an example. If we have three countries, country A has the highest productivity. So a worker can produce worth $15 an hour, but this worker is paid $14. So the margin when you get when you deduct the wage is only $1 per hour. Country B has the lowest wage, so the wage is only $0.50. But in country B, the labor productivity is only about 30 cents per hour. So if you produce in B, you're going to lose money. Country C has a wage in the middle, about $3.5 an hour. But the productivity is about $7. So which country would you choose to put your factory in? So most people would choose country C, not A or B. So the point here is that cheap labor itself has never been the reason for factory to move to China or to leave China. Similarly, rising wages will not be the reason for factory to leave China, unless wages have been rising, but productivity hasn't. So that's the key point. So let's compare wage growth to labor productivity growth. You can see that before 1997, China's labor productivity grew 2.6%, but wage growth by only 1.3%, about half of that. That means production in China getting cheaper and cheaper in terms of labor cost. But after 1997, you can see that this is the labor productivity growth, this is wage growth. So wage is growing faster than productivity. That means the unit value production among $1 production, the percentage of wage cost has been rising. So for the same 8 industries, I just calculated for each dollar of production, how much is the wage? Of course, varies across the sectors. But across all sectors, this ratio has been increasing. We call unit labor cost. For the highest is very apparel and leather, fur, and other textile, and also electronics. It's really high. It's about 60%, some like 70% or 70%. So think about this: $1 product, about 70 cents of wages. So can the producer cover the cost if he or she has to pay other costs? Actually, why have been wages rising so fast in China, especially higher than the rest of productivity? There are many reasons. First, reforms have pushed up the wages. there are also more labor production laws that can help to maintain labor right or raising wages. I think the most important reason is the supply reason. There has been a labor shortage since I think about 10 years ago. China's labor force was fast rising in the early years of reforms and reached the peak around 10 years ago. I think around 2013, and then started to decline. This will continue to decline many years into the future because of low fertility rates in the past 20 to 30 years. So this is a very nice survey conducted by Scott, I think, in 3 different years. Although this is not very recent data, but this also shows something very important. So this is the last year Scott had data, so 2007. This is the workers of different ages that work off farm. Basically, they are now doing agriculture, but they are basically having a rural hukou. So by 2007, 98% of the younger cohort of workers are working off farm. Basically, if you go to rural areas in China, so no young people are working on the farms. That means there are no labor can be drawn from agriculture and put into industry and service sectors. As we know that in the past, in the early 30 years of China reforms, one of the important reasons is to move workers from agriculture to non-agriculture. That's one source of economic growth. So this is the lady I met at a factory a few years ago, and she's already 73 years old. So this is what she does in the factory. So she just just pick up everything that's dropped on the ground, put it into the basket. This is her job. So she's 73, very healthy, still working, not retired. Yeah. So normally when wage starts to rise, what will happen to manufacturing? So the low productivity sectors, industries, they are low wage, low tech, low capital intensive, tend to move to other countries. This is one solution. Or alternatively, it could also be that productivity start to rise accordingly. How can firms achieve that? They can do so by using fewer workers and workers with better human capital. They can also automate some of the productions. That leads to my the theme of today's talk, the rest robots. So before I talk about robots, let me show you another factory I visited. This is a textile factory. Let me show you, these are 2 different workshops. The first workshop is this. So this worker basically is sitting on a moving chair, and then she moves so back and forth, trying to find that this is spinner. So when the spinner is broken, she needs to go. When the thread is broken, she needs to go there to connect the thread. So she's taking care of these 2 rows, sitting on this moving chair. This is already improved. In the past, there will be 10 workers working on this row. So in the same factory, this is a second workshop. So look at this lady. So she is walking around. She is the only worker in this whole workshop taking care of like 20 different rows. So this machine will detect the broken thread. It cannot fix it. So the workers still need to come to fix it, but she doesn't need to detect those. This machine can detect. And also this is better machines, not easy to be broken. So basically in the same factory, you can see 2 different generations of technology. In the first generation, I already used not many workers. But here, the number of workers may be only about 10% of the first workshop. So this factory maybe have 20 workers. This workshop may have only two workers. So if we look at data, also shows similar trend. I will show you that in almost all sectors, production have expanded. But if you look at number of workers hired by each sector, except for electronics, there might be an iPhone effect here. All the other sectors have seen a declining number of employment of workers in this sector. So this leads to my study of robot. China has seen the fastest rise of robots being used by manufacturing industries. You can see that the growth rate. This is stock or so-called operational units being used in the country. So China has already come to the top in 2015, about Japan, US, Germany, and South Korea, the top 5 countries. These are. Although China still lags behind in terms of the so-called density of robot, basically per 10K workers, how many robots are being used? South Korea has highest is 500. China about 110, about 49. But this is a new installation of robots. China had 140,000 industry robots being installed in 2019. This is more than the total of the number of robots being installed in Japan, US, South Korea, and Germany together. So to study robots, since there are no data on this actually, so we started to collect data. So of course, our data is not only for the study of robot, we also study other things for China's manufacturers. We call it China Empower Employee Survey because we study both workers and the factories. So the overall objective of this survey is basically to follow the transformation of manufacturing in China. So to do this, we team up with many partners in China, Hong Kong, mainland China, Hong Kong, to study China's manufacturing. We have conducted 3 rounds of surveys. So in 5 different provinces, they are Guangdong, Hubei, Jiangsu, and Sichuan, Jilin. So if you know China, that they are in a different part of China. We cover 100 cities, 2,000 firms, and for each firm, we also survey 10 workers. That's why we call Empower Employee Matched Survey. This is the so-called average characteristics of these firms. 9% are state-owned, 40% are exporting. Their average sales revenue, immediate sales revenue is about 6.6 million. Asset value also 7 million. They on average hire 105 workers. 70% of the workers are college educated, and 40% are females. To study this different questions in manufacturing, we designed a very complicated so-called survey instrument. It has over 3,000 questions covering all kinds of information: accounting, external environment, CEO, production, sales, management, technology, trade, personnel. For the worker survey instrument, we have 750 questions. Also covers everything: human capital, family, health, job history, current job, personality test. So to do this survey, actually we spent like 2 to 3 years to design a survey instrument by visiting many firms, maybe I think at least like 50 firms, to talk to workers, CEOs, and to test our questionnaire. This is not easy actually. Even how to define robot took us a long time because we are not really engineers. So this is the field work. These are our, we have hired about 500 enumerators in each round of survey. This is our students and young teachers interviewing the CEOs of firms. This is talking to the workers. This is doing a firm worker survey. At night, they need to look at the questionnaire to make sure that all the questions they have answered are correct or reasonable. So about 9% of our firms use robots. So why do Chinese firms started to use robots? There are both supply and demand reasons. From the supply side, it's very simple. for all countries in the world, the two industries that use a lot of robots are the car factory and electronics industry. So whether it's Japan, US, Korea, and Germany, China too. Since China dominates in both the auto and the electronic industry, that means China uses a lot of robots, and China's usage of robots will continue to grow because China really produces a lot of cars and electronics. Of course, even today, the robotic technology is not perfect. This is one factory I visited. This is an auto factory. So this is a welding robot. After this guy has welded the car body, and this worker need to fix the missed part by the robot because the robot cannot do everything. That means, given the current technology, since auto electronics maybe are the two industries that are most suitable for robots, China will continue to use a lot of robots in many years to see. I think from demand side, there are two reasons. The most important reason actually is, I think, it's the cost reason. Because as I have shown you that as wage started to rise, when there's a labor shortage, firms have incentives to automate their production, to use more machineries. Of course, they can also use robots. So if you look at these two curves, this is the declining growth rate of working age population. So the peak happened at the time China started to use a lot of robots. So these two curves are negatively correlated. If we go to my CES survey, my firm level survey, we look at what kind of firms are more likely to adopt robots. So one of the reasons CEOs told us that one thing they really they are not happy with is that workers leave their jobs very soon. Some workers leave their jobs in 9 months, some leave in 3 months, some in 3 weeks, some in 3 days. So the worker turnover rate is really high. So the CEOs or the firm owners need to spend a lot of time trying to recruit workers or retain workers. This is really costly. So indeed, we find that when the voluntary worker turnover rate, that means workers leave the firm by themselves, is high, these firms are more likely to adopt or use robots. This is non-voluntary turnover. Basically, these workers are fired by the firms. There's no correlation. Another thing the workers mentioned is that they quit the job because they found the manufacturing job is too boring. They have to repeat the same jobs again and again. You saw the video clip I showed you. So to study this, so we follow a well-established literature by David Otto and other scholars in the US. We designed some questions to measure the tasks of workers. So, I mean, there are 3 general definitions of tasks. I mean, there are like 20 different questions to measure this. One is called manual task, basically use hand, use strength to work on this. There are routine tasks, that means it's repeated. And abstract tasks, basically this is more about management, engineering. When we found that when the tasks are manual or routine, the factories are more likely to use robot to replace workers. So the final factor is basically government policies. The government has promoted the usage and production of industry robots. They set very high and aggressive goals. And in our survey, we also found that about 15% of firms reported they receiving some kind of subsidies for robot usage. So this is my last slide. So the takeaways from this study is that robot adoptions are determined by both supply and demand factors. From supply side, technology is the reason. From demand side, both labor shortage, rising wage, and government subsidies can explain part of the why they are adopting robots. So one thing China is different from many other countries is that Chinese government and people worry less about job replacement by robot at the moment, but this may change in the future. So let me stop here.
Okay, everyone, good. Wow. Hongbin, you covered a lot of ground. We have about 20 minutes now. We're trying to we'll keep to the hour. It's a Zoom time, right? When our hour exhausts us, but I probably could go on and on with Hongbin. We're going to put your questions and answers in the box. And then I'm going to start with the first one, and then I'm going to pick them from the audience. Okay. And so what you're saying, Hongbin, is that part of the reason for this big expansion of robots is obviously demand side, right? You made that very, very clear. But another part is the sort of supply side, is that they're getting subsidies from the government and that kind of thing. So what I want to know is, Chinese firms, or let's put this, in other countries, as wages went up, firms had a choice. They could move overseas or shut down because there wasn't automation like they have today. Now there's a choice of letting firms move overseas or automating, right? And keeping your firms going. And obviously, is that a choice that the government is sort of balancing as they're deciding to subsidize? And should we expect a lot of firms to be moving out as well as automating, or is automation sort of making that unnecessary?
That's I think, great question. Yeah, I think there's a very famous theory in economic development called flying G's hypothesis. Basically, manufacturing firms move from low labor cost or low wage country to high wage countries. So when a country develops, the wage rises, firms will move away. So I don't know if they shut down or not, but they may change their name, they may move to another different country. This happened to many countries, actually, to Japan, Korea. I think this especially in East Asia in the past half a century. Before it was from Europe, US to Asia, actually. But maybe at this time could be different, actually. So because I mean, this is we are in an age of really fast technological advancement. So it could happen that the price of machinery and robot will go down dramatically and make it really cheap to use them, actually. If that happens, workers do not matter anymore, actually. Production can be anywhere in the world, actually. Can be in the US, can be in Europe, can be in China, right? Even if wages is rising, because you don't need a lot of workers for manufacturing jobs. If that happens, where will be the manufacturing? So, I mean, I don't think we have been thinking about this question. In the past, we have followed the model of manufacturing follows the wage, actually. But this may change, actually. I mean, my guess will be that these manufacturers will go to where the market is. So if the major market is in the US, the manufacturing will come back to US, right? Automated production here, right? I think some industry will come back, actually. Maybe some go to Europe, but a lot will stay in China. Because China is a major market. As I have shown you that 80% of China's manufacturing are for domestic market, not for exporting, actually. So there's a huge market there, actually. So if there's also if there's an increasing return to scale, that means the larger the scale, the lower the cost. The manufacturing will stay there, actually. Some may come back to the US, actually. Some will stay in China, I think. Some will be in Europe. This may not be a good news for other developing countries. That will happen in the past, actually. So, unfortunately, yeah.
So really, almost a new development mode, mode may be unfolding, and very, very interesting. I think that's another whole seminar or a course right there. We have lots of questions out there. Let me ask the first one. It's from a colleague of ours in Palo Alto, And he says in 2012, the passing of the new labor law pretty much ended cheap labor advantage. If it was called advantage, it was disappearing anyhow. His question is, application of industrial robots in China would lead to the rising of labor costs or not? And would that affect the employment rate? So I think there's a couple different issues there. Why don't you sort of deal with those?
That's a great question, actually. So I think when the labor law was passed, the labor contract law was passed, I was in China, working in China, actually. There was a lot of debate. Economists don't agree with the law. They think this is too early, too fast for China. So basically the law says that if you hire a worker for two contracts, two continuous contracts, consecutive contracts, you need to give this worker a tenure. So, it's so hard for professors to get tenure here at Stanford, right? But if you work for two countries in China, for any employer, you got tenure. So this remind people about the so-called the iron S ball, right? Like the permanent empowerment for the state-owned enterprises in the past. So of course, Chinese still have a memory of that, so people don't like it. So the law was passed, but what happened is that for most employers in China, even for some major employer, I don't want to mention the names, but they just fired all their contract workers. And then they rehired those workers through the labor contracting firms. So these labor intermediaries, so they hire the workers for the firm, so they can change the contract every 3 years without the need to give them the tenure. Actually, this solves the issue. Actually, of course, there's a cost, but I mean that law still has, I think, impact to protect workers. That's a very important law. But I mean, the rising, the rise of robot is in response to the shortage of labor and rising wages, and this is caused by, I think, lower fertility 20, 30 years ago. So since we didn't have a lot of children, fertility declined, so labor declined in 20 years when these babies grow up. So when there's a shortage of workers, wages will go up. At the moment, because the rising wage and shortage of labor are the cost of using machineries and robots. So we haven't, I mean, at least firms in China or government in China haven't thought about whether in the future, when the technology of robot really advances very fast and the cost so low that it become a cost of workers' displacement or unemployment, then it becomes a separate issue, actually. I think China hasn't reached that point yet, or the technology of the robotics hasn't reached that level, actually. So the cost is still pretty high, I think, at the moment.
This is from one of our friends from Hong Kong, and works as a tech investor, and she's out there sort of observing what's happening in the tech manufacturing sector. And she's seeing that more and more production lines are starting to use these robots. So it seems like it's pushing down from the real, from just using in auto manufacturing now to move to the more finer ones. She says, such as Foxconn manufacturing production lines are starting to use these technologies. What's your view on robotics in tech manufacturing and cost effectiveness, and bring that down? And there's a couple, and then she ends with one more question that 3 or 4 different people have wanted to know. Will it ever start replacing humans faster than the decline of fertility, so that there could be, lots of extra jobs out there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, I think in the whole human history, even the first industrial revolution, so the reason that people started to invent machines because the labor become really expensive. So this is one of the theories to explain why it happened in England like 200 or 300 years ago, the first industrial revolution, because the coal is cheap there and labor was expensive because of the pandemic there. So I think it's not surprising that if labor continues to decline, So Chinese firms will use small machineries. And because of the high cost, not only in China, also in the US, in Europe, scientists and engineers have incentives to invent machines and lower the cost of machines and make the machines better to be applied for even for assembling an iPhone. Today, I mean, iPhone still, I mean, I use a lot of human, right? They are too tiny, too small to use robotics. You need to use a human. But if they really, if Foxconn and other firms really have a hard time to retain and recruit workers, they don't want to train the workers every 3 weeks, right? It's so hard. I mean, you need to train them, then they leave, train them, they leave. So I think their recruiting team maybe is bigger than the front worker team, actually. That's the issue. I think when the cost is really high, they have to do that. I mean, there's no choice, I think that day will come, I think.
Very, very interesting. I'm looking through these lots of questions here, and there's a couple questions probably asked most concisely by one of our colleagues from the University of California, San Diego, and he's wondering, and there's other people that are wondering this: are these robots China made or are they imported? And are there quality differences between Chinese and imported robots? Is it significant?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, we did ask a question about the brand of this robot. Actually, I think about half imported, half I think made in China. Of course, the quality and price of imported robots are both higher, actually. So especially from Japan, some imported from Europe and from Taiwan, actually. But Chinese are quickly actually catching up in production, especially the lower end robot, but their price is much lower, actually. For the same robot, I heard, I mean, the factory owner told me that it's only about 1/3 of the price of the one they bought from outside China, actually. So, I mean, there's incentive for them to, I mean, to do this, right? Because it's a really profitable industry, and also there's a lot of, I think, room for lower the cost, actually. You know, Chinese manufacturing is really good at one thing is good at lower the cost.
Good. Thank you, Hongbin. Yeah. So, we got a couple more minutes. I've got the last question picked out, which was my question, and as a question answered by two of these people here. I'm going to wait on this one. There's one you maybe can answer in the next couple minutes, and it's more general. Where did all the China labor go? I thought there was lots and lots of rural people out there. Why is there a shortage? So that's, I know you could teach a whole class on that. Hongbin and I teach a class together, and he does teach 2 classes on this. So keep it short, but this is a really good question, I think.
Right. I mean, China has a lot of labor, but as an absolute size, right? So, but if you look at the both population and also labor force, population is still growing, but very slowly. Labor force already peaked actually 10 years ago, as I show you. So labor force has been declining, and also, I mean, most of the rural people in the past 2 or 3 decades have been relocated from land, from agriculture, to industry, manufacturing, and services. So, and the fast-growing sector, actually, nobody has studied this. I don't know any economist has studied China's service sector, actually. Service sector is the fast-growing sector in China, for sure, actually. I think one of my friend here, I mean, he knows data better than I know, actually. And among China's like 800 million workers, about half are working in the service sector, actually. So this is, I think, really fast-growing sector, and many of the factory workers have actually left factories and moved to the service sector, actually. We do have some questions on the, because this is a so-called panel study, so we follow up these same firms every 2 or 3 years. So we asked the CEOs how many workers have left your factory and where do they go. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know, but sometimes when they know, they told us that a lot are going to the service sector, actually, not staying in the manufacturing sector. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and it's sort of from your study. What was sort of unexpected, number one, but what would you, I mean, he's saying, and a couple people said, it's really, sort of surprising that China is at the forefront of this. But, like you're trying to say, it's not surprising because, there's all these incentives on the demand side and the supply side to do that. But is there anything we should worry about? What would you worry about 10 to 20 years from now, 2035? There's lots of goals set for 2035. Should we be trying to head off some problems, off there? And I think that there's a couple questions like that, but I think if we can answer into that one, it's ending on a really very high note, Professor Li.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So, I mean, I know, there are still some puzzles. Actually, I have a lot of puzzles by preparing for the lecture, actually. So, what really surprised me is that China's youth adoption robot was much faster than most people have thought. Because, in people's mind, China still has low wage, relatively low wage, right, compared to US. But maybe the cost of machinery and robot has been really low now. So maybe because of the advancement in technology. But one thing that's worry me now, and maybe in the future more, is what if the technological improvement is so fast and the cost suddenly drops, and maybe most workers cannot fund their jobs anymore. So the machinery would replace most of the jobs. What will happen by then? Is China or any other country well prepared? To deal with the issue? I think this may happen actually. So, but we just don't know. So when it's going to happen? How those workers who have low education, like what you described in your talk, right? Your new book, they have low human capital, and when their jobs are replaced by the robots, what are they going to do? So this is, I think, a very important issue. So, so to get prepared for that, I think today we should educate all the workers, before they go to the job market, right? When they are still in school. I think that's the hope.
Yeah, your student. One thing great about being a professor, even at Stanford, is your student has to say that his professor's work is good still, even after he's a professor. Thank you, Hongbin. No, I wanted to thank you for absolutely fascinating talk. It's, you covered ground. The questions are great. I apologize we didn't get to everyone's question. I think if you send Hongbin an email, I'm sure he would respond to you. And we'd love to keep connections with everybody here and continue this conversation and the conversations on all of the questions on Chinese economy, and need your help to understand them. So thank you for being with us today. I want to invite you to join us again on June 18th, if you're in the US, June 19th, mark it on your calendar. If you're joining us from China, it's our next China chat, and this will be Mike McFall. Now, this is really the boss of Hongbin and I. He's the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute. He was the ambassador from Obama to Russia for 5 years, and he's going to really be thinking about US-China relations. He always draws on his experience of, he's a Russia specialist, but he spent a lot of time studying China. You'll find him fascinating. He doesn't think there's a Cold War yet. He doesn't want there to be a Cold War, but he's going to be talking about those types of issues in his talk. So please join us in a couple months, okay? And you can find more details and register for our event by visiting us at SCCEI Sky at stanford.edu/events. And we hope you stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Li.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Scott.